Hello, good afternoon. I think I just crossed over afternoon. So I had practiced this with good morning, and I was like, now I've already thrown my first change that I have to deal with, is this afternoon now. How is everybody today? How's the conference been going so far? Great. Lots of information, hasn't been? How many of you have heard the theme of change? How many of you are not listening? It's change. I mean, that's the theme of all the stuff this morning. And I like the way we started the last session, which is, did we all feel good about what was happening in the first session? Now we're going to get real. We're going to get real here when we talk about this particular topic around resilience. And we're going to get real because the question always is, when you deal with change, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to get through it? How am I supposed to sort of stay focused on executing for the organization, right? That's the big question. And nobody really tells you how. The reality is it's with leaders. Does everybody buy that? It's with leaders, really. Nobody buys that? Good, thank you, I appreciate that. I'm going to look to you all day today. Here's what I'd like you to do. We do want a little bit of an interactive session. Thank you. We do want a bit of an interactive session. It's the big green button, right? And so I want to start that off with everybody standing up. Can everybody stand up? All right, while I got you standing, these are being handed out. They're resilience audits. You don't need to do this as part of what we're going to do today. It's something you can use you can use it here, you can fill it out. You can fill it out when you go back to your office. But it's really helping you deal with some of the things that we're going to talk about and allow you to benchmark with yourself, maybe benchmark with other colleagues that are here, maybe take that home and have a benchmark conversation back at the office. Recognize that there is a QR code. If you want to go straight to Wilson Learning and what is it that we can offer around that, I'm not really going to talk about that, but you can go right there. By the way, we also have another audit. We really like audits because it's a way by which to challenge you to think about your situation. And a lot of what we've been talking about is what we call learning transfer. How do you implement learning in a way that has an impact to the business, right? That's what we just talked about in the last session. And it's a critical challenge that you as L&D leaders have. And so if you go to our booth and fill out the audit, you'll actually get entered in to win a Google Home. All right, so that's my little promo for what we're going to do today. Which way do the hands of a clock move? Clockwise. Okay. And still in India, I'm from the US, they still move clockwise? All right, so imagine that there's a clock on the ceiling. It's a big clock. What I want you to do is to use your finger and trace the ways that the hands of a clock move. Now, what are they? Which way do the hands of the clock move? Clockwise. Okay, it's a big clock, by the way. And what I want you to do is slowly, as you're tracing it, bring your hand down in front of your nose. Stop, look at me. Now lean forward and bring it down below your chin. Now, I just did this in Tokyo last week. I do it all over the world. Before you answer the question, think about that. Which way is your hand moving? Come on, guys. Gonna try it again? I'm gonna unbutton my jacket, and in fact, we're gonna do a bigger clock this time. All right, so what I want you to do is lean back, nobody fall down, bigger clock, bring your hand down in front of your nose, stop, look at me, keep your finger pointed to the ceiling, now bring it down below your chin, lean forward. Which way is your hand going? How many times did we go over which way do the hands of a clock move? I asked you, you guys laughed like you thought it was a silly question. How silly is it now? Why is it moving anti-clockwise? Yell it out, please. Where you're looking from, your perspective. Okay, when we look at this issue of change, we talked about it this morning. Esther referenced it when she was talking about the cow and all the different kinds of things. When we look at something that we're certain about, like the way the hands of a clock move, but if you challenge yourself to maybe push and look at it from a different perspective, two things happen. One is you might see something different. By the way, great. That gives you another perspective, a way to think about things. You're learning something. By the way, if during this session, I challenge you to think about things from another perspective and you see it exactly the same way, that's great. That confirms what it is you already know, right? So either way, it's a good thing. And I'm hoping that when we talk over the next 25 minutes or so, that I'm offering you some change in perspective around this whole idea of dealing with change. Is that okay? Let's see where I am. So what I want to do today, and I'm going to keep you standing just for one more minute. I don't like anybody sitting down. If I'm standing up, everybody's standing up. All right, what I want to do is discuss what happens to human energy. That's really the perspective we're looking at. When we talk about leaders, the role of a leader is to engage others to commit their full energy towards the creation of value and success. The operative word in that is energy. And in times of change, things happen. So we're going to examine what that looks like. The way we're going to do it is we're first going to look at the impact of change, and then we're going to review 3 steps that help you refocus energy. Again, I'm going to speak to you as leaders. I know many of you are in L&D and those kind of functions, but you're tasked with enabling your leaders to engage better, to deal with change, and ultimately to build resilience. The benchmark that I told you is about the audit, and what we found from the research that we've done clearly indicates that change initiatives, successful change initiatives, are about leaders really building a resilient organization, basically building resilience in themselves and their constituents, and taking charge, ultimately seizing the opportunity to move forward in the context of opportunity. That's what we're going to talk about. Is that okay? So you can sit down. So by the way, you're going to go back to the office tomorrow. There's going to be a memo that you're going to get. By the way, here's the role you're going to play. You're the leader of an organization that supports the number one product in your organization. Number one product. Here's what the memo says. Wonderful news. Through research and development, we've identified a brand new direction to go to. We've got a new product that we're going to introduce to the world, and we believe it's going to become the number one product. Okay? You, by the way, are one of our most valuable leaders. The systems and processes that you put in place are exceptional, and we love the team that you've built. But you need to understand that over the course of the next 2 years, some of your people are going to be moved to the new division, some of your people are going to stay with you, and some people might not cut the change that we have to put in the organization. Your job for the next 6 months, until we announce this, is to keep the organization, your organization, focused on what they need to do, because we can't let the current number one product slip. That's the memo you got. How do you feel? Huh? It hurts? Yeah, it's like, ooh, yikes. Well, tell me, how else do you feel? Overwhelmed. Frustrated. Excited. Huh? Accountable? Well, I haven't gotten that one. I got, last week when I was doing this in Tokyo, I got frustrated. Right? Yeah, everybody reacts to change differently, don't they? And ultimately, when you think about this, that's really what the focus is. It's interesting, you listen to what everybody said. The first comment was overwhelmed and frustrated, I forget, angry or whatever, something in those lanes. Then you got a couple excited, right? Because in that memo was something nice about you, what it is that you've created, right? So when we talk about the word resilience, let me define it as they do in the dictionary. It's very simple, the power or ability to return to the original form, position, or whatever after being bent, compressed, or stretched. Now, let's be clear, when I'm talking about resilience, I'm not talking about going back to the way it was. Resiliency is a personal issue, not a condition of your work environment, right? So when I'm talking about resilience, it's about your energy focus where it needs to be focused to execute the strategy. And the reality is, when we look at what has to happen in any organizational change, there has to be implementation, right? And ultimately, there has to be energy focused on the new direction. So again, energy is so critical in terms of what it is that we talk about. So let's understand and think about how to understand change. And through our research, there's a couple things that we've found, really 2 lessons. The first one is no matter how positive or negative the change, there's a perceived loss factor in there. You're losing something. The second one is, very clearly stated, the decision about energy and where to expend it is the employee's decision, not yours. Okay, let's deal with the first one when we look at that perceived loss. And I think you can see these, but again, what you're going to see is employees don't come out when a change happens and says, boy, I really feel that I've lost something. I feel that, no, they kind of say something like, I used to be known for this ability or that ability. I'm losing the people that I know. It's not the way it used to be. I don't think we can even survive. Those are things that they say. And part of what you need to do as a leader is understand that perceived loss. They're not going to tell you what that is, but ultimately, what you need to do is understand that type of loss, what that represents. And now again, this is important to classify this because it's a little decoder ring. Once you're aware of this, it helps you as leaders listen to what's being said, refocus some of the conversation, understand and clarify. You can get these slides, by the way. We've got your information. We'll send you these slides after. I love it that you take pictures. By the way, tell me when you're going to take a picture so I can be in it. But you can take pictures if you want to. So again, the first thing is about perceived loss. The second thing is about energy. And I love the whole thing about energy. And the first thing we need to talk about is define energy. We're calling it, when we think about the conversation about energy, is discretionary energy. How much time I have, how much energy I have to expend beyond essentially just the minimal to keep my job. That's what discretionary energy is. And remember what I said is leaders' role is to engage others to commit their full energy towards the creation of value and success. So you're trying to capture this discretionary energy. And there's some research that was done a couple years ago by Gartner that said when faced with a choice of how I use my energy, when faced with a choice of any change, people go to one of three areas. They go to proactive. You know what? They're engaged, they're happy, they're fully committed. You can see it. The second place they go is to reactive. In that case, they're grudgingly compliant, and they basically might be motivated to get even, but you can see it again. They're dragging their feet. You can see it. The third area is inactive. Inactive is kind of pseudo-comply. I'm going to come in at the time that the work starts. I'm going to leave when work ends. And my job is to make sure no one sees that I'm not engaged. Now, let me ask you a question. And this is part of the audience participation part. And I'm sorry, probably nobody told you that math would be involved. There is a little bit, all right? The first question I have for you is, what percentage does research indicate of people go to proactive when given choice? What percentage do you think? How many people think 50%? How many think more? Less. How much less? 25. How many people think less than 25? How many people think less than 5? Okay, so we're somewhere 25 to 5. What percentage do you think go to reactive? 50? 80% go to reactive. Negative. How many people think more than 50? Okay, let's look at the last one, inactive. What percentage do you think? How many people think more than 50? This is where you don't have to worry about math. 20? Okay, here's the reality. 5 to 15% go to proactive, 5 to 15% go to reactive, and a full 70 to 90% go to inactive. What does this mean? You know what it means? Is that as you're going through any change initiatives, 70 to 90% of the people you're dealing with are putting their energy towards remaining undetected. Where's my energy focus when I'm trying to remain undetected? My belly button. Can you say that here? Inside. Right. I mean, that's reality. And the thing is, but they're doing everything to show that they're not disengaged. Right? And by the way, if I'm given an engagement survey, how do you think I'm going to answer? Right in the middle, because if I tell somebody how I'm feeling, might be detected. Now this is really important. When you look at it, what we're then saying is there's 3 steps that a leader can do. And just to be really focused on what it is, it's really, really simple. The first thing you can do is resolve the change for yourself as a leader. I need to understand the loss that I have. I need to refocus my energy because I need to then step into the second step, which is I need to intervene to help with others. And the last thing is, at an organizational level, I need to lead the change initiative. It's a pretty simple kind of a process. Hard to do, but simple to look at. If I do those 3 things, ultimately what I can do is address that loss and refocus energy. So when we look at the first one in terms of recognize and reconcile for myself, everybody goes through change in a predictable pattern. Not a predictable time, but a predictable pattern. I've seen this, for example, this pattern last all of 5 minutes, and I've seen it last 5 years. Okay? So again, it's because it's individual every time. And here's what's happening. I'm on a plateau, everything's happening, everything's great. You guys didn't get the memo yet that you're going to get tomorrow morning, right? All of a sudden, there's a change that happens. Whether it's good or bad, it's a trigger. You've thrown into this cloud. This is what it feels like, because the unsettledness, because I believe that there's loss and I'm not sure where to focus my energy, I'm stuck in this fog. It's called the in-between times, where I'm not sure what's happening. I don't know what to do. In fact, one of the things that I heard last week when I put that challenge in front of somebody is that a couple people said, I just don't know how to feel. How many times when the change happens, you're like, I don't know how I feel. You're stuck in these in-between times and you're not sure what to do. And it really feels unsettling. What happens then is, as time goes by and you begin to get focused, you begin to explore different things that you could do. I could leave. I could change my career. I could change my focus. And what happens is you begin to take stock of what you could do. You then identify the path you want to take and you move forward in the context of opportunity to a new plateau. Boom. Another challenge, and that's how it goes. And again, it's important to understand that that's the process. Now, when you look at the overall response to loss, I gave you all those different things that they look at in terms of what you're losing, but they really fall into 4 categories. The first one is a question about, where do I fit in? I don't know. That's called disorientation. The second one is much more filled with anger and really upset kind of a thing. Isn't it awful? Oh my gosh. That's more discontent. I used to be somebody. I used to be known for something. We're no longer doing this. Gosh, all this conversation about technology and the loss of what humans get to do, can you imagine how much disidentification there is going on or potentially could be going on? By the way, research indicates the newest trend is put humans back in AI and technology. So you got to just pay attention to that. Just want to add that. The last one you look at is energy-wise, I'm just going to quit and stay. And that's more disengagement. And that's one of the topics that's been one of the biggest topics from a leadership standpoint around the world. Okay, so when you look at that, I'm not going to talk about this one. But ultimately, what I need to do as a leader is I need to stop this conversation about the loss that's happening. Because I'm in a role that really is about, that the organization is counting on to refocus energy. So I need to stop this conversation that's going on in my head, mentally interrupt it. Now that I know that I might look at it from a loss perspective and I understand all those disses, I now become aware and I can take responsibility for myself. So I want to stop that conversation. The next thing what I want to do is challenge what I'm saying to myself. Is it true, is it not true? How do I understand that? How do I relate to it? What are the options then going forward as I look at defining and enabling conversation for me? That takes some time. Most of the time, leaders are aware of the change before the employees are, and it's very important because it's time for the leaders to reconcile and to resolve things for themselves. Now that you've done that, you're in a better position to help others. You need to intervene to help others. Now let's go back to this list I showed you before. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a little bit of a cheat sheet. So if you guys want to get your cameras out, because you might not be able to read it, okay? But essentially, remember, we got disorientation, discontent, disidentification, and disengagement. So when you look at, don't take the picture yet. When you look at sort of the disorientation, it's kind of basically you're feeling sort of high levels of confusion. I'm not sure what's happening. Discontent, again, it's much more about anger. Disidentification, I used to be somebody. And then disengagement, I'll just quit and stay. But here's the key. Again, don't take it yet. When I look at those 4, if the loss, and I perceive the loss from who it is I'm trying to help with, is one of those 4, I've got something I can do. So for example, if it's disorientation, I'm going to help them reorient to what the organization is trying to do. I'm going to have conversations with them about where the organization is going and maybe even how you fit in. If it's discontent, I need to diffuse the anger. because you can't deal with it because of the anger. So my role as a leader is to stop, listen, clarify. And now let me challenge them in terms of what it is that they're saying to themselves and help them focus again towards how to get through it. Disidentification, again, you're linking them through goals and objectives to what it is that they need to do. And then finally, when you look at disengagement, how do you make sure that this person feels like they're part of something that's important? That's about defining the direction of the organization and this individual's place in it. Yes, this is when you take the picture. 3, 2, 1. Boop. Okay, so ultimately you've got to have the conversation. How do you have that conversation? This is a pretty structured way by which to have the conversation. And this is, by the way, rocket science. What I'm telling you, way over here. This is not rocket science. It's pretty, you guys probably know this. But what you want to do first is clarify the reaction to change. Don't get pulled into the conversation about how bad it is or whatever it is. Clarify what they're thinking. Clarify how they're feeling. It's their loss, not your loss. Don't be in it. Then what you want to do is redirect the conversation. Again, it's the potential of the organization. Remember, when you're going through change, you need to take stock. Help them take stock. What is it that they have that can contribute to the organization? And help them see why this change is driving the organization towards the future. And then the other thing, very important in this place when you're intervening, is identify some action steps that they can take, you can take. Remember, this is an individual conversation, so it gives you an opportunity to really get in and demonstrate to that employee, and therefore then the group of employees, that you care, right? And by the way, this demonstrate that you do, not pretend that you do, okay? So the last thing you need to do, and this is really the context of everything you need to think about, is that as leaders, sometimes we're having to implement change when we had nothing to do with it, especially if we're in middle management. We had nothing to do with it. It's coming down to us. And yet we still have to resolve that. How many times have you not necessarily agreed with the change, and you might say, here's what I'm telling to my employees, and then you grab somebody on the side and say, it's really not that good, right? And the reality is that you as a leader can tell stories about the organization, about the future. There's 3 stories you can always tell. They fall into these 3 categories. The first one is, my time is completely frozen. Does that mean I can keep going till forever? I'm just saying, it's been 14:53 for a while. Sometimes when you're on a stage, sort of the second feels like 2.5 minutes. It's like, good Lord. Just correct me with what number we've got. Or somebody yell at me how much time I got left. When we look at the 3 stories, there's one of 3 typically that they can fall into. Let's look at them one at a time. The first one is, and you've heard it before, we're in crisis. It feels like it's only a matter of time. You might say that. The employees might say that. It's only a matter of time. This is not going to work. We're going to die. And ultimately what happens from a strategic kind of standpoint is talking about reduction, cost cuts, you're cutting people. And ultimately what the organization is trying to do is create stability. They're just trying to get stable so that they can then create the future, but it does have a devastating effect on the energy of the organization because work satisfaction dims, and then ultimately people begin to live in the loss, and they leave. The second story that you can tell is one of we're changing again. I mentioned a couple times that I just did this keynote in Tokyo. For anybody that you have worked for a Japanese company or understand Japan, every year they change the strategy, people get reassigned, and that's just what happens. And so that's obviously something that happens a lot, but you've been in organizations that try this, try that, right? Especially in L&D. How many times are you stuck in when you're introducing a new program, they said, oh, so what happened to what we talked about coaching last week? We're doing something different. And so what happens is, basically the question that's in people's minds is, will this even work? We don't even know if it'll work. And there's a lot of cynicalness in it, and in fact, people live in the in-between times. Remember what happens when you get the trigger, you fall into that cloud. And so because you change again before you can resolve that, people are just sitting in that cloud the whole time. You're doing process, structure, reorganize, re-engineer, re-something is what you're doing. And ultimately, what they're trying to do is remain competitive through the changes because they're not sure. In fact, many organizations don't have a very clear or articulate strategy when they're in this place. And then work satisfaction is unpredictable. And what happens is, and I see this a lot, is people will work really, really hard because they believe this is the change, and they believe this is their chance to make something because the area happens to focus on where they are, and they get burned out. Or opposite, they just rust out, right? They stop, they get disengaged. The third story, and the one that I would suggest is one that you need to always and consistently tell to yourself, in the public times and in the private times. 3 minutes now. Whew. That went 14:3 all of a sudden. Is really around the opportunity, and a realistic opportunity is what you're looking for. That's what it is you want people to believe. And so you need to resolve again for yourself, what does that opportunity look like for you? How can you articulate it as you're intervening for others? And how do you tell that consistent story to yourself and to the organization? And then what you're trying to do then is you're really looking for growth, satisfaction is healthy, and ultimately people are highly engaged and they stay. They're really, in this particular case, this is about realistic opportunity. Realistic in that it's probably hard. None of the change that we're dealing with is easy to do. It's probably hard. So you don't want to fake people out by saying, this is easy, we can do this. It's realistic, but you really want to point them to what the opportunity is. So in leading from that story number 3, what you want to do is provide a way for those that you lead to see how to move forward in the context of opportunity. You want to initiate dialogue. Always initiate dialogue. You cannot assume how people are reacting to it. They'll be completely unexpected, so initiate that dialogue. You want to reinforce, if they're talking about things they could potentially do, you don't want to shut them down. Reinforce what they're thinking. Talk about how to redirect some of that energy towards where you're trying to go. Again, this is your leader, you're trying to engage them from an energy perspective. Share your perspective about the opportunity. Here's what I see. Here's how I see you in there. What's your reaction to that? And then go forward in the context of opportunity with realistic optimism. Again, just to summarize, what you need to do as a leader, and if you're an L&D, you need to look at creating the environment whereby your leaders can understand, excuse me, how first to recognize and reconcile their own sense of loss, deal with it from themselves, intervene for others. You're going to deal with those 4 disses for yourself, but then how do those disses have an impact on your constituents, on your employees? And then lead the change process with that story number 3. Now, guys, I'm just about done. I got a 1.01 minutes left. And I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm glad to take any questions in that 1 minute. Yes, please. Yell out loud for me if you could. I'll repeat what you said. Oh, okay.
In young organizations, right, where we have a large millennial workforce, they thrive on change, right? And you know what? If I'm going to start engaging with them to say, here's a story, I'm telling you why, whereas they're actually thriving on change. How do you propose that? What do we need to do then? Because they're looking for it. If we give it to them, there is some amount of dissatisfaction for sure, but it gets over really, really quickly, and the amount of time we'll take to engage will not really work.
It's the way that you engage them. It's the way you do that. Now, remember again, the millennials is a big issue that you have. That's a topic that we're all trying to deal with. Recognize that millennials. You have to sort of break it down to the basic. Millennials is about a situation that somebody happens to be in that time of their life, right? And so the younger generation, people that are younger, are often able to deal with change, right? So they're naturally resilient. The advantage you have as a leader is all of what it is I've been saying is they like the change for change's sake, but you're trying to get the change to enable the organization to go forward. So this is about harnessing the change acceptance that millennials have, but focusing it towards the creation of value and success for them and the organization. That's the missing link, is that millennials are more worried about change for themselves, and their idea of career is completely different. Guys, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. Please feel free to come and visit me in our, I think you call it stall here, but in our booth. We've got some other audits you want to have, and if you want to talk more about your audit, I'm glad to do that. I really appreciate the time this afternoon. Thanks so much.